tell me the difference between the function of a descriptive study and an experimental study in terms of grounding. What's the relationship between those two studies in terms of grounding?
The experimental looks to the descriptive to find grounding.
The experimental looks to the descriptive to find grounding. How many of you understand what he said? How many of you think he's right? Well, I'm in the minority once again. I think you're right. There's another way to say it, however. Just reverse that. How do you say it in reverse? Now again, the question, how do you differentiate, or what can you say about the relationship between descriptive and experimental in terms of grounding? I'll say it the other way around.
The descriptive provides grounding.
The descriptive research provides the grounding for the experimental research. In a typical chain of research studies, let's say in a perfect world, how many studies would you need to truly pin down and quantitatively demonstrate a relationship between two variables? How many studies would you need? Minimum.
Assuming it's done well, done right.
That's right. In a perfect world, how many studies at minimum would you need? Only if you speculate your hypothesis.
Okay.
Okay. So what's the answer to the question? 2. You don't throw away descriptive research simply because you want to do extremely well in experimental research. Because before the experimental research comes at least one well done descriptive research. Does that make sense? These are mutually dependent. And as I said, back in the 70 to 85 era, there was a great debate about which one was more important. And finally, I mean, this is very, very bright, very, very arcane, marvelously complicated people doing this kind of argument. And ultimately, they concluded that that's not a good question, which is one of the wonderful sources of insight in science, is to realize you've been asking the wrong question. Not the question of which is more important. You might more validly ask which one comes first. But it's a marvelous thing that people in social science and in natural science are happiest when they can feed numbers into a calculator, or in recent years, a computer. And they really know they're doing the job and they're feeding the numbers into the computer. And generally, you feed experimental outcomes to a computer. In what kind of a study? I already hinted on the answer. In an experiment. Now, we have not mentioned at all, your reading has brought it up a little bit, but the next one here is relationship of hypotheses to theory. Try that. How does hypothesis relate to theory? If you've read your material carefully, you have discovered something about the word theory that you better get straightened out before you can try to wrestle with this question. What is peculiar about the way that science uses the term theory, in contrast with the way preachers use theory, and laymen in general use theory?
Typically, theory is used in the sense of hypothesis.
At best, it is used in the sense of hypothesis.
Supposition.
Quite often, it is hunch.
Yeah.
My hypothesis is, ever heard that? It's always done with a kind of a deep throat. My hypothesis is, we'll never see that money again. You know, that's my hypothesis. And what does the person really say? I'm afraid that, my hunch is, you know, my gut feeling is, all the rest of that kind of stuff. Is that a correct use of the word theory? All right. My theory is, my theory is, my theory is. But is that a correct use of the word theory? No, absolutely not. Theory is a very precise word. Have you ever heard of the theory of gravity? You ever heard of the theory of relativity? You ever heard of the theory of evolution? Oh, you know, people just get too excited about evolution. It's only a theory. People get too excited about gravity. It's only a theory. Well, I tell you, you know, if you don't take it seriously, some pretty dumb things can happen. Right? What's wrong with that use of the word theory? The word theory in science is
Based on tested hypotheses.
tested outcomes of hypothesis testing. In other words, it is the accumulated evidence that comes from tested hypotheses. Generally, you may build or add to theory with one study, but very rarely do you do one good experimental study in order to create theory. Science, natural science, social science, depends on the testing and retesting of hypotheses to build insights and understandings which accumulated and supported are called theory. So then in the direction of not knowing to knowing, where does theory lie? And this, of course, is the big problem. The layman puts theory down here. The scientist puts theory here. Why are we doing research? In order to, the word is build theory. To build theory. Now, as I told you, this course is very logical, all except the vocabulary on some features, and it is in places where there is a lay meaning and a professional meaning that are in severe contrast. And this is one of the most severe. Okay, then, if that's the case, how do hypotheses relate to theory? That's the question here. Relationship of hypotheses to theory.
Come prior to the theory.
Hypotheses will come prior to theory, and it will be out of the testing of those hypotheses that we will get the outcomes that become the contributions to theory building. Now, if you've got that one straight in your head, it's going to help a lot. So try real hard putting down on your notes somewhere. Hypothesis testing produces findings brought together build conclusions. Conclusions from hypothesis testing produce theory. Yeah, I could. I really could. I want to hear you do it. Because I know I can. I don't know you can. Try it.
So, hypothesis findings.
Testing hypotheses will produce findings. All right? Go ahead.
To produce findings and testing findings will produce conclusions.
In effect, collecting findings will produce conclusions. And conclusions ground theory. You got it. So you can do it. See, I knew I could do it. I was hoping you could, and you did. Good. Yes?
The book somewhere said that hypotheses were derived from theory.
Yes. Which is another process, and it's very logical,
Okay.
because this whole process is cyclical.
Ah,
Aha.
right.
In other words, theory will spin off, almost like, you know, the sparkler, it'll spin off other hypotheses.
Okay.
So then those hypotheses are grounded by what?
The theory.
The already standing theory.
Would that become the laws? Because the book also says that the hypothesis and the law becomes theory.
Not too many people make a big point of differentiating law and theory. but some do. And in general, theory is larger statements than laws. It's just another step in there. I usually go from conclusions to theory when I'm thinking that myself. And that's what I was doing here. I'm going to go with red. But if laws fit in there, I mean, they do fit in if you add that level and scheme. Much of this, by the way, is in the what's called the philosophy of science, or particularly the applied philosophy of science. Does that satisfy, sir? All right, how do we define a population? Once again, a word that the layman uses one way, the scientist uses it a different way. What is a population?
A targeted group.
I would prefer you not get in the habit of using the word targeted. Sooner or later you begin to do rather inhumane things to people when you talk about them as target populations. Missiologists do this all the time. They're going to target a population, and you see the cannons. I don't like the word target, that's a personal thing, but the selected population to be studied, the selected group or sector of society that you are intending to study.
Would you say a set of observations?
A population is a set of observations. Yeah, that's another way the word is used, and it's not incorrect. The problem is that if you mix that one into the logic of design, it's it's a little bit like looking at the chicken yard, and there's a population, and you look in the collection of outcomes of a study, there's a population there. But from a design point of view, you're much better off relating the population of a study to the individuals or database that's to be examined. It's not wrong to do it the other way. It's not wrong to use population in terms of the people that live in a certain region as a population. Those are all correct, but the most careful technical use of population will use it to define, even as you did, the group of people to be targeted or to be examined selected for examination in the study. Now, do you generally look at the whole population? Interview the whole population? Observe the whole population? Test the whole population? Send questionnaires to the whole population? Thank you. Only if it's relatively small. How many one-armed violin virtuosos are there in the world? Very few. We probably don't have a sampling problem when we're studying left-handed violin players. Our problem is quite the opposite. It's a problem of finding them. And once we find them, they're in our sample.
If they're willing.
If we don't ask them to write at the same time they scratch their nose. Okay. Drawing a sample. How do you draw a sample? First of all, you don't need chalk or a pencil. Drawing a sample. Do you see that picture? It's like drawing out a sample. You reach the net in and you pull out something. Okay? Now what are you going to try to pull out? You're going to try to pull out a sample. Now, what does that drawing the sample, what does it involve?
Finding representative.
Finding some basis to assure that what you draw out is
Typical representative.
typical of the
Large.
population. So we're concerned then primarily about what word, what idea? Representation. Okay, good. The three types of samples that are the most commonly encountered are convenience sample, random sample, and representative sample. What's a random sample? That's the middle word here. Random sample.
So each person in the population has the equal chance of being chosen.
And that is probably best illustrated by what simple example? How would you do it?
Putting them in that.
Putting on uniform slips or chips, all the names, put them all together, scramble them good, and pull one out. How many of you ever see on the television the demonstration that they do night after night of the lottery outcomes for the day? Now that's the names in a hat. And in order to show you that it's really untouched by human influence and no possibility of corruption, they put those numbers in this wind machine, and the wind stirs them, not even a human hand. And then they bubble up when a valve is opened to let one of those tennis balls pop up into the channel with a number on it. And that number is the first number. It looks like an ultimately fair system. What would you have to know in order to be sure that that system was really a fair system of random sampling? You'd have to trust that system. Never get beyond the need for trust. When you look at that, how many of you have seen that process on television? Quite often on the news programs in the evening. And they bubble that thing up and they show you the number. First number is so-and-so. The second number will go to the second number is so-and-so. Isn't that wonderful? And the whole idea is, see there, I didn't influence it, just the wind. Except that all the numbers in there were 4.
Yeah.
The whole barrel was full of 4. The number tonight is 4, 4, 4, and 4. Isn't that amazing? All those numbers there are 4. That's what it is. In other words, the truthfulness of that system is going to depend on what it was loaded with. Right? Now, have you ever thought about the possibility of getting nominated to get the cake that we're going to give out at the end of the party by putting your own name in there several times? And ultimately, what are you doing? You're biasing the random draw.
I was part of the 1969 selective service drawing that mentioned, look, I didn't know how unfair it was at the time. Nobody ever said that. In the board.
Yeah, yeah. You saw
Some
that.
names weren't in there.
In October, November, December.
Fortunately, I was born in January.
What you learn in boarding y'all. Huh? How do you explain your life? Okay, that's a random sample. The most common way we do small sample studies is through what process of sampling? Some kind of representative sampling. We talked about that yesterday in terms of getting different categories and making sure we get at least one case from each category and so forth. And then there's another one mentioned here that we didn't talk about in detail yesterday. Convenience sampling. What is that? How do you explain the convenience sample?
Take what you can get.
Take what you can get. That's beautiful, beautiful language. Yeah. I want one woman in the study, and gee, I keep waking up every morning and finding this one. I might as well use this one. That's one reason that psychologists study their wives so much. Convenience sample. Now, the next line calls for, and from here on we begin to get into things that we haven't really a lot of grounding for and haven't had a lot of conversation before. I want to see how you're thinking about them. Control group designs are one type of experimental design. Control group designs are, I'm telling you, one type of experimental design. What is a control group design? Jeffrey? You don't like to be called Jeffrey, you like to be called Jeff. I learned that yesterday. Doesn't matter. That's what you were telling me yesterday. It completely threw me. I lost my place in the script of the sky. No, seriously, what was your point? I couldn't hear it, and you can't remember. We really make a good team here, don't we?
Control
Where
group.
was it? Yeah, what's a control group design?
Control group design is one in which you have a group that does not receive a particular variable you're studying or determining. The treatment variable.
The treatment, good, thank you very much. That's the right word. The treatment variable is given to whom?
The experimental group.
Experimental group, and the control group?
Either doesn't receive it or receives some sort of treatment that, or not treatment, but I don't know what I want to say.
Something which is not manipulated.
Yeah. By the way, that's one of the hidden problems of doing control group design, is because there is no such thing as a null experience for human beings. I can take 12 rats in their cages and yank out 6 of them 3 times a day and treat them very, very nice. And put them back in again. And do that 3 times a day. That's experimental treatment. I pick out the same 6 out of this habitat. But it does every day. Okay? And treat them very, very nice. When I get all done, my hypothesis was if you treat rats very, very nice, they're more apt to be docile. I didn't explain my grounding for that hypothesis, but let's assume that I have some. Can you do that same study with human beings? Why not?
It's unethical to manipulate human beings in that way.
No, that's not the key problem.
We think.
We do that all the time when we, you know, when
You can't control their lives to that extent. You can't control human life to that extent.
well, I can decide to be nice to them at a certain particular time of day.
There are other inputs.
There are other inputs. Worse yet, the assumption that you make about the rats having no experience during that same period of time cannot be made about human beings, because you cannot create a null experience for human beings. They're going to be doing something. That's one reason why, quite commonly in schools, we want to give a certain kind of thing to some of the kids, but not all the kids. What we do is we literally create a kind of a depriving situation. So we depress one group while we stimulate the other group. We're not just doing null, we're doing this. You see it? There are a lot of things about the experimental model that don't work very well with human beings. We'll see that as we go along. But an experimental design is the ideal way to do research if you're a psychologist. And it's based on the notion that from biology, that you really don't have a good test of something until you have an experimental and a control group. What must be true of those 2 groups, experimental and control? What must be true? They've literally got to be equivalent in every relevant respect. How easy is it to get a control group then among a human being group? How would I do an experiment in here in which I put half of you in one experiment, an experimental group, half in the control group? Some of you just kind of look like the control group. I mean, I can tell.
You could try to match us on.
That's what I would have to do, and match case by case. And is that going to be easy? Well, who is your match in here, by the way?
It all depends on what variables you're looking at.
Right. We can match for height, we can match for age, we can come close.
Mustache.
But is that the ones, are those the variables that would really count in this experiment we're going to do? And it's very tedious to try to figure out a control group, to say nothing of how we are going to do the treatment.
You work with twins.
That's why a lot of work is done with twins, because there's some assumptions you can make about twins in terms of genetic structures. And also in terms of environment, because quite often the environment of twins is parallel. And the really interesting studies have been done with separated twins, where the genetic structure is parallel, but the experiences in life have been non-parallel. Very fascinating body of research using that sort of sampling, or that sort of design. Experimental design is what we're going to teach you how to use. We're going to teach you how to do experimental design, because it is the rudimentary way of thinking about experiment. And if you can't think of it that way, you probably can't do anything more sophisticated. However, there is a way of sophisticating the experiment, and these are typically called the quasi-experimental single group designs. See the next term there? Quasi-experimental design. And there's a complication there I'm not going to get into today at all, but Borg is really good on it, and now, the last edition wasn't, but the new one is, yes.
Going back to the control group design, is that to establish the internal validity?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That is concerned with, and really deals only with internal validity. Why doesn't it deal well with external validity?
External validity would be how it is transferable to other cases.
Exactly. How does it compare with outside? For example, if I do a study in here, divide you folks in half, and I carefully match and do all my control group very carefully, I may be able to say with some confidence that in a matched control group type design, I get such and such an effect from it. Yeah, but that's internal validity, internal to the cells that I'm dealing with. External validity says, would the same thing happen if we were dealing with people in California, or in Mexico, or in France? What's the possibility that that would have any bearing on it? Good, very nice use of that particular kind of validity. All right, quasi-experimental, we're going to let it gloss past, but let me tell you, you're going to want to read the material on quasi-experimental designs before you do the second paper, or as you're doing the second paper. In the first paper, we're not going to need anything on experimental or quasi-experimental. Does that come as a surprise? The answer is no, that's no surprise. The first paper is only concerned with a descriptive proposal. Questionnaire design and item styles. The underlined word here ought to be Likert, L-I-K-E-R-T. This is one of the most common forms of item used today, and it's used in all sorts of studies. I have just finished serving as technical consultant for a study being done here at Trinity for its 10-year review for accreditation. And most of the items we're using are Likert style items. A Likert style item is probably so familiar to you that once I tell you what it is, you say, oh yeah. L-I-K-E-R-T is named for a man. His first name I can't remember right now. Sorry about that. But he just came up with this idea and everybody's been using it. You make an extreme statement, and then you ask the degree of agreement with that statement. I believe that I am an outstanding researcher. Now, I give you that as an item, then I give you five response possibilities. That's the typical Likert. What are the response possibilities there? Strongly agree, down to strongly disagree, with three others arrayed in the middle. So we label strongly agree, strongly disagree, and the modern use of Likert, you don't even label the others. Everybody knows it by now that those are in between. So you create a set of statements that are strongly worded. Why strongly worded?
Polarity.
I hate tomatoes. Do you see those two statements? Which one would make a good Likert item? The first one. Why? It's an extreme statement. What about the second? It's kind of a mushy statement, right? Worse yet, I like tomatoes. You don't want mushy items. They can be positive or negative. It's not the issue of positive or negative that's at stake here, it's the strength, the vitality of the item. And then out here, I put 5 circles. And I label this one strongly disagree. And this one strongly agree. Now some people line their Likerts up this way, some like that way. It doesn't make a lot of difference as long as you stay consistent. Now then, if a person says, I hate tomatoes. I don't like tomatoes, that's a fact. What would I mark up here? Strongly agree with that statement, right? And it's very easy to get a lot of data in a hurry from people, especially things that relate to opinions, Likert items. You will need to know how to write Likert items. So start thinking about working on it.
Can you overdo the strength?
Pardon?
Can you overdo the strength?
No. Not unless it's, ludicrous. I think that's a pretty strong one. See, what you're after is strongly agree, strongly disagree. And the point is that if you have a milk toast kind of, I don't mind tomatoes. You know, I strongly agree with that statement. That makes sense, doesn't it? Well, I strongly disagree. I could have a guy sitting here saying, if I get two guys side by side that have 1 and 5, and they're not very far apart. Okay. Now let's get down to the more meaty ones here. Oh, by the way, give attention to how they're written. One of the characteristics is they're written as extreme statements, strong statements. The other characteristic is they deal with only a single variable. Let me show you how to screw up a Likert item. I hate tomatoes on Tuesdays. Now what's happened is that I've fouled it up because it's now called a double item.
Like Tuesdays.
Pardon?
One can not like Tuesdays or prefer Tuesdays and then not prefer
Right.
tomatoes.
See, I can say, I generally like tomatoes, but not on Tuesdays. Well, in order to get at that, I've got to have 2 items. I can't split it or combine it. Because if I say, I strongly agree, I hate tomatoes on Tuesdays, what are you going to infer about Wednesdays? You have no basis. See, I haven't even found out either piece reliably. So that's why a Likert item must be written in a singular manner. And that's a little trickier than it sounds, because quite often we like to put qualifying words in. Peterson and I were working on this instrument this morning, and we had one item where we had a qualifying word in the kind of an adjective in one place, and we realized that it was creating a dual item. So we had to pull the adjective out. I wish I could think of the item right now. But you really have to go very carefully when you're designing Likert items to not put qualifiers in that put a person's attention on 2 different things. You've got to make it very singular. Okay. Variables. How do we use the word variable? And then, of course, the difference of independent and dependent. Save that for a moment. What's a variable? What is a variable? A variable is a phenomenon being studied. That's not a bad start, Bob, but it can be extended a little more precisely than that.
It's a measurable phenomenon.
Yeah, the phenomenon being studied is one that varies or is going to be examined for its variability. That begins to be kind of self-explanatory or redundant. A variable is a variable. But it's not just a phenomenon being studied. It's a thing being studied that will have more or less, higher or lower, or some other measurable differentiation from one to another. Look around the group right now. Tell me what variables could be employed to measure the people in here. Quick, give me one.
Computers.
Whether or not they have computers. All right, that's a variable. Whether or not they have computers. Very good. Give me another one.
Gender.
Gender. Thank you. Very good.
Age.
Age. Thank you.
Color of hair.
Color of hair. Thank you very much.
Position in the room.
Position in the room. All right. You see, there are a lot of things that could be examined because they are not all the same. They vary, and they are measurable in a variable way. Does that make sense? Hence, they are variables. Now, strictly speaking, we don't use the word that loosely in science. We also add a kind of urgency or importance thing. Now, we could, for example, length of fingernails, you know. Not apt to be terribly important in here, right? It might correlate rather interestingly with gender. It'd be very fascinating. And a lot of times people do fascinating things in their studies, a lot like people go to the library to see what's there. And, you know, they spend there all day long looking at books. What did you do today in the library? Oh, I found so many fascinating things. Did you know that a cockroach will eat a, no, and then it goes on. Come on. There's got to be some sense of importance in a variable. It's something you're looking at for good reason. But if you don't know the word variable, what were you apt to say instead? You'll have to say rather goofy words like, you know, thing. You know, that thing we're looking at, that thing we're measuring. What do you mean thing? Well, variable is a lot neater word than thing, but it means about the same thing. So if you really want to be sophisticated, you keep using variable in place of thing. It's just one of those marks of sophistication. And variables are things you're going to be examining in contrast and comparison, you're going to be measuring. And particularly in a quantitative study, a variable is going to be something that you have decided you're going to represent in terms of its measurement data. Now, in a verbal analysis, what are your variables? In a verbal analysis, like you would do in an ethnography or in a descriptive study from verbal text, from interviews, what's a variable?
The responses to the questions.
That's pretty open. That's kind of an everything.
Oh, so themes, maybe.
There you go. You're going to need some kind of a word like themes. And one of the technical words we use instead of theme is, would you believe, factors. We use factors. What factors are you looking at? Which really means what variables are you looking at, or clusters of variables that are important in this particular study. And that's down the list here. What's the difference between an independent and a dependent variable? This one messes up more people when they first get at it, and I like to get it early so I kind of get you on the right road so you don't mess it up. You really got to know the difference between an independent variable and a dependent variable, because every hypothesis is a statement that connects at least one independent and one dependent variable. A hypothesis is a statement that has the dependent variable and the independent variable connected. Do you remember the example I gave you a little while ago with my rats? I was going to bring them out and I was going to treat them nicely. I was going to pet them 3 times a day. Remember that? Treating these rats that way would be my independent variable. How did you know that? That's right. Good. Good. That's the independent variable. Now, what did I tell you was going to be my dependent variable in my hypothesis? Docile behavior. Okay. Now look at it. Can I measure, can I assess the treatment that I give them, those rats? Sure. I better be paying attention to it. How much? How often? Keeping good records. Being able to tell you what I've done. And quantify it. And quantify it. And that would be my, say it again, independent variable. Now, I would measure that. That was my variable examining. What is it called? Humane treatment, nice treatment of the rat. Now, my dependent variable is consequent docility in the behavior of the rat. I've got to define that. I've got to operationalize it. Can I measure it? Yeah. See, I didn't say attitude. It's very hard to measure attitude in mice. Right. It's almost as hard in human beings, but because human beings cheat a lot. You can't ask human beings about their attitudes to get very reliable answers. All right, now let's look at what makes it independent, what makes it dependent. What's the difference, independent and dependent? Can someone really give us a concise definition of how you know which it is? And I'm very impressed that so many of you knew that was independent.
Dependent is exposed to some kind of treatment.
Dependent is what again?
Dependent is not exposed to some kind of...
I'm missing the middle words there.
Is not exposed. You
Not
live there without some kind of exposition to do any kind of treatment.
I'm not comfortable with it. I'm not even sure you're on the right track, but you may be. Just hang in there. I'm not going to pass judgment on it, but that's not quite clear to me.
Independent is something that I have control of, and dependent is something that I do not have control of.
That's very good. Where did you learn that? Seriously, where did you learn that? You remember? Some previous course or reading here or what?
Yeah, something from this course.
From this course?
Mm-hmm.
Good for you. Yeah, and that also deals with my handy mnemonic of how to remember it. The independent variable is the chosen variable. You've chosen this, in effect, you've chosen the treatment. Hence, it's your independent variable. It's been chosen. The very word independent means that I was independent, free to choose. Now, the dependent is what happens because of that, and I'm not free to determine that. Whatever happens will happen because of the naturalistic relationship. So it's dependent. For example, watch this behavior, please. What was the independent, what was the dependent variable?
Dropping.
Tell me
The
what.
dropping. That's the
The
independent.
dropping was the,
Independent.
okay, so when I put my thumb
Yeah.
out from under this book, it
Right.
dropped.
That was the
So when I
independent.
release the book in space so that it can move toward the table because of the attraction of brown objects and purple objects, otherwise known as gravity, then a noise is made, right? The noise is the, which did I cause? Now this is my problem with the word cause. Which did I cause? Watch it again. Which did I cause?
First. Independent.
Technically, I released my thumb,
Yeah.
and thus the book dropped. But just as surely as the independent variable was I pulled my thumb out, that created the dropping book. Gravity dropped the book, I didn't throw it. Okay, so all of this was a chain consequence of my independent variable. Now, did I cause the dropping of the book? That's a philosophical question and probably doesn't make much difference. Yes, clearly the dropping of the book is the independent, it's my chosen behavior. Notice what I choose again. I choose to drop the book. The book hitting the table relatively flat causes a noise. That consequence is what we call a natural connection. Nature, not human causation. I don't decree that. I allow that. Nature creates it. Okay? So the relationship between the independent and dependent variable is sometimes more complicated than it seems at first, but in general, whatever I, notice the letter I do try in, I-N-D-E-P-E-N-D, I independent. Got it? So it's whatever I do is independent. Whatever nature does is dependent. Okay? And that can be real helpful because as you read and as you write about your design of an experiment, the experimental condition will be your independent variable, and that's going to be the heading, independent variable, the treatment. And dependent variable is going to be the outcome that you're measuring. All right, now just got a couple more of these. Internal and external validity. Internal and external validity. We mentioned that once this afternoon. We kind of stopped to define it, but not very well. Somebody give us a quick definition of internal or external validity.
External is when what you found can go outside of your, generalized.
External validity is concerned with generalizability outside this set or context. Internal validity has to do with its validity within a given described context. Okay? That's good enough for now. There's more to it. What is a factor? We've used that word a few moments ago. We talked about variables and factors. Factor is the identifiable component of a relational situation. Let's go back to this one. Tell me the factors.
Position of your phone.
Height of the book, size of the book.
Distance from the table.
Weight.
Gravity. Elevation of the book, lots of things. These are factors. Now, what did you say?
Color.
There you go. I have one convert. By the way, there's a special society. We have meetings on Tuesday nights. It's called the Alternative Gravity.
That really hate tomatoes?
Yeah, right. Oh, great. Factors need always to be, the term needs to be used carefully, because you want to use factor one way and variable another, and that's in the book too. But in general, a variable has to do with measure. And a factor has to do with a consideration or a thing you're paying attention to, and quite often is a condition. Such as I suggested, the condition here is that of a suspended book that is triggered ultimately into gravity by the removal of a thumb. Now, the thumb is a factor, but it's not going to be the thing we measure here. The question of the drop of the book is what we're going to assess. The noise, the degree of noise or sound going to have.
The glossary, those factors are generally clusters of variables.
Right.
And not just this, they can be a single variable
Right.
or cluster.
Because when you're coming down to variables, you're talking about things that can be measured. You don't measure things in clusters. You measure them in singulars. Okay. Real good. Real good. All right. Now, we're going to drop that for now. I want to pick it up at 6, probably tomorrow or the next day. We'll pick it up and spring on. I'm trying to help you see 2 or 3 things. First of all, that there is not an endless list here of things we have to deal with carefully and precisely. You notice the rest of this sheet. We've gotten a long way down through this kind of a task already today. If you can grab those terms, those ideas, and get them clear in your head, you pretty much got it. And you've done pretty well already today. Second session, and you're off and running. The other reason we're doing this is because I want that done in the front end. I don't want people still trying to catch up with vocabulary on the last session. We need these words. We need these ideas. Third reason is that this kind of thinking that we've been doing, even as we talk about these things, and the very fact that we're talking about it, I'm not even giving you the crutch of visualizations. I'm not even giving you pictures. I'm making you use words and think with your head and respond with your voice. That is what is going to produce in you a kind of scientific orientation to the sort of experience that you encounter in life. And it'll transfer all over the place in your reasoning and thinking. It's not something we do under extraordinary circumstances. People who are trained scientifically respond scientifically and in a much more highly disciplined manner because of retooling their mental processes. And that sort of discipline is part of the reason that I think this course is worth teaching. We'll get to the rest of these and pursue the rest of the list at some point. Right now, I think we probably need to take a break, and we'll do that. And when we come back from break, I'm going to ask you to get out the task for today. What was the task for today?
Problems.
Yes, I was listening closely to make sure I heard the word problem. It's not research question, research problem. We're going to look at research problems and how you can assess a research problem. And we're going to also get a chance to, probably we'll start even with hearing your topic of research. What is a topic of research?
Statement.
Topic is a statement. What is the topic of your research? In terms of what you're apt to do for your first proposal, what topic will it deal with?
I'll be working on partnership.
Partnership. Partnership. Does that sound like a topic?
Yes.
Does it sound more like a problem? Is that your research problem?
Yeah.
I thought it was your topic. That distinction between topic and problem is where we're going to start after break. But I can tell you that that's your topic. Your problem is, see, my topic is stable walls and unstable walls. My problem is, this one keeps moving out. That's a problem. So, within that topic, partnership, you have a research problem. Now, the research problem is not the same thing as your research concern. My anxiety is that wall, my concern is that wall might fall on us and hurt us. But my problem is, what do I do? How do I deal with? How do I understand a moving wall? That's my research problem. But my research topic is walls, stable walls, unstable walls. I want you to be able, each one of you, to name your topic as we start after break. So sometime during the break time, say, what am I going to say, what am I going to say, what am I going to say? Because we're going to actually go around the room. Something that I don't do very often, but we'll do this time. We'll make sure everybody gets this all in the Greek. I want to hear your research topic, and I want to hear your research problem. But we're going to start with topic after break.